You think you're in control, that you're too smart to be used, that you see everything. But let me tell you something most people won't dare say. If you feel the need to constantly explain yourself, you've already lost. If you're afraid to say no, afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of disappointing others, then you're not free. You're functional. And here's the brutal truth. What's functional is disposable. Nietzsche once said, "Freedom requires the courage to displease you." So tell me, are you ready to hear what you've always suspected but never had the courage to admit? You think you re-smart, but you re-being used. Have you ever looked back at a conversation and realized you gave too much away? Not because someone tricked you, but because you offered your emotions for free. That's how it always begins. Not with a lie, not with aggression, not with force, but with a question, a subtle pull, an emotional nudge dressed as curiosity, kindness, or attention. And you, proud of your awareness, step into the web thinking you still in control. Let me break something to you. If you think you're immune to manipulation because you know how people work, that's exactly why you're easy to use. People like you are not deceived through threats. They're deceived through compliments, through being understood, through the illusion of safety. You're not controlled by chains. You're controlled by your need to be seen as strong, as generous, as kind. Manipulation thrives in people who need to be good, because they will betray their instincts just to preserve the image. It's not that someone lied to you, it's that you lied to yourself first. Picture this. A dog sits in a velvet collar. It looks elegant, royal even, but it's still a leash. That's how most manipulation works. You don't resist it because it doesn't look like control. It looks like love. It feels like respect. It sounds like, "I need you." Until one day you realize you were never loved, only useful, not respected, only predictable, and not needed, only available. You were not chosen. You were selected. And there's a big difference. Nietzsche once said, "He who cannot obey himself will be commanded." Sit with that. You follow your craving to be accepted and end up obeying everyone but yourself. You offer your time before it's asked, your advice before it's needed, your forgiveness before it's earned. And then, you wonder why people treat you like you owe them. It's because you trained them to. Your silence teaches them that disrespect has no consequence. Your over-explanations teach them that your boundaries are negotiable. Your endless empathy teaches them that your pain comes second. Do you want to know the scariest part? The most brutal, silent truth? You helped build the cage you're trapped in. And now, every time you try to speak up, it feels like betrayal. Not betrayal of others, but betrayal of the fake peace you've been addicted to. That's why you keep quiet. That's why you rationalize, forgive, explain. Because if you admit you're being used, you'd have to admit you allowed it. And the ego doesn't like that. But let me be clear. This isn't about blaming you. This is about waking you up. Because until you see how you got here, you'll never leave. You'll repeat the cycle, just with new faces, new jobs, new relationships, same manipulation. You call it being polite. You call it being the bigger person. You call it maturity. But what if I told you? They call it convenience. They know you'll say yes. They know you'll avoid conflict. They know you'll try to understand their side, even when they never tried to understand yours. And if they know that, why would they stop using you? Would you stop drinking from a well that gives water endlessly, without asking for anything in return? Of course not. You'd keep drinking, until it's dry. That's exactly how manipulators see you. Not evil, just useful. And the day you run dry, the day you finally say no, they won't thank you for all the times you said yes. They'll resent you, ignore you, call you difficult, changed, selfish. But you know what? That's the first sign that you've started to heal. You thought you were safe. You thought kindness was protection. but it became your camouflage and your curse. People don't manipulate who they fear. They manipulate who they can predict, and you've been predictable for too long. The manipulator sees you before you see yourself. You think manipulation begins when someone says the right words, but that's not how it works. It starts the moment they see what you won't admit about yourself. Long before they act, they observe. They listen to what you repeat. They notice the way you explain too much, how quickly you smile to make others comfortable, how you tense up when there is silence. They see your anxiety to be understood, and that's where the hook is set. Because manipulation doesn't need violence. It just needs one fragile spot in your identity that you are still trying to fix with someone else's approval. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most manipulators don't even need to lie to you. They just amplify the lie you already believe. You're only lovable if you're useful. You're too much. Tone it down. If you upset them, they'll leave. They don't have to say these things. They just have to mirror the script already playing in your head. And you, desperate to prove them wrong, start playing their game. You chase. You perform. You offer more and more of yourself just to silence the doubt they never even voiced. And here's what makes it even more brutal. They often don't know they're doing it. People don't manipulate because they're always malicious. They do it because they can. Because someone taught them that weakness gives access. And you've been giving access to people who never deserved the door. Let me put it bluntly. You're not a victim in their game. You're the opening move. Because instead of asking, "Is this person safe?" you ask, "How can I be enough for them?" And that single shift changes everything. They can sense it in your tone, in your pacing, in your need to explain your boundaries instead of stating them. They see the hesitation in your eyes when you say no, and they know you'll eventually say yes. All they have to do is wait. They see the way you apologize for having needs, the way you laugh when something offends you, just to avoid conflict, the way you say, "It's fine," even when your soul is screaming. They don't see your strength. They see your fear of not being liked, and that fear is leverage. Let's stop romanticizing empathy for a moment. Let's stop pretending that always being understanding is a virtue, because when empathy is used without discernment, it becomes self-erasure. You disappear piece by piece, just to keep the peace. Manipulators love empathetic people. They love the ones who always give the benefit of the doubt, the ones who stay in the conversation long after it's turned into a performance, the ones who keep loving even after being used. Why? Because you make their job easy. Think about this. If someone hurt you, disrespected your time, your values, your energy, and they know you'll come back anyway, why would they ever stop? They don't fear losing you, because they know you'll convince yourself to stay. They don't need to change, because they know you'll change your standards instead. You're not held in place by their manipulation. You're held by your own desire to be chosen, even if it means choosing someone who drains you. So let me ask you something dangerous. What part of you still believes you need to earn love? That's the part they've been feeding off. That's the part they target. Not because they're evil, but because you handed it to them wrapped in silence. You think the manipulator is powerful? They're not. They're just responsive. They adapt to what you allow. They mold around your guilt. They thrive in your doubt. They calculate your thresholds. They listen to your unspoken scripts and then play them better than you do. And as long as you keep trying to be good, you will keep being predictable. And as long as you're predictable, you're easy. Not because you're weak, but because you've been trained to prioritize connection over self-respect. Here's the shift. You don't beat manipulation by fighting harder. You beat it by becoming illegible, by being harder to read, by saying less, needing less, explaining less, and by asking one single question before every interaction. Am I doing this to connect or to prove I'm enough? If the answer is the second, walk away, because if you don't, they'll see you before you even see yourself. when saying yes becomes a mask for fear. You probably think you're generous, that you helpful, that you just have a hard time saying no because you compassionate, understanding, loving. But let me ask you something raw. When was the last time you said yes because you truly wanted to, not because you were afraid of what would happen if you didn't? What if I told you that most of your yeses weren't kindness? They were survival. Every time you agreed to something that drained you, every time you bit your tongue just to keep the peace, every time you forgave too quickly, gave too easily, stayed too long, you weren't being strong, you were being scared. You see, most people think manipulation is about someone doing something to you, but often it's about what you keep doing to yourself. You betray yourself quietly, in the name of being seen as good, in the name of being liked, in the name of being kept. But here's the psychological trap. The more you say yes to avoid being abandoned, the more you abandon yourself. It's not noble, it's not virtuous, it's exhausting. Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Because once you accept yourself, you stop performing. You stop negotiating your value. You stop bending into shapes just to be digestible. But here's the uncomfortable truth. You've mistaken flexibility for love, and people have learned to stretch you until you snap. They don't even have to be aggressive. They just have to ask, and you'll fold. Not because they're powerful, but because you were afraid to take up space, afraid to be inconvenient, afraid to be disliked, afraid to be seen, and then rejected. Let me put it clearly. You were trained to fear boundaries. Maybe it started early. Maybe being good meant staying quiet. Maybe love looked like compliance. Maybe you learned that making others uncomfortable meant you'd lose them. So now, as an adult, you keep saying yes, not because you want to, but because no still feels dangerous. Because deep down, you still think love is something you earn by being agreeable. And manipulators love agreeable people. They love people who don't want to disappoint, because all they have to do is hint at displeasure, and you'll bend. They don't need to control you, you do it for them. Let's call this what it is: emotional debt slavery. You do favors no one asked for. You give empathy to people who've never offered it back. You explain your every move like you're standing trial, and then, when they still mistreat you, you blame yourself. If I had just been clearer, if I had done more, if I was less sensitive. Stop. You are not being rejected, you are being replaced, the moment you stop serving their needs. And the only reason it hurts so much is because you built your identity on their approval. But here's what no one tells you. The first real no you say will feel like violence. Not because it is, but because you've been conditioned to believe that your silence was virtue and your compliance was love. So the first time you say no, the guilt will eat you alive. The voices will scream, selfish, cold, cruel. But those aren't your thoughts. Those are echoes from people who only loved you when you were useful. This is the war within. You want to be respected, but you fear being alone. You want to be seen, but only if they still like you. You want to be free, but not if it costs you attention, affection, approval. So you stay, you agree, you explain, and you call it kindness. But it's not. It's compliance dressed up as virtue. It's performance for an audience that never applauded you in the first place. Let me offer you something brutal and clean. You do not need to earn your right to say no. Not to friends, not to family, not to lovers, not to anyone. You owe no one an explanation for protecting your peace. You owe no one a justification for choosing yourself. The people who punish your no are the same ones who benefited from your inability to set boundaries. And the day you stop explaining, they'll panic. Because they were never in a relationship with you. They were in a transaction. And you just ended the contract. So next time you feel that old guilt rising, next time someone looks at you with that disappointed silence, ask yourself this: am I afraid of being cruel? Or am I just not used to being real? Manipulation is easy when you have no boundaries. Let's not sugarcoat this. People aren't walking all over you because they're evil. They're walking all over you because you left the door open. Manipulation doesn't always come through mind games or emotional blackmail. Sometimes it walks in politely, removes its shoes, and makes itself at home in your silence. Because here's the truth. Where there are no boundaries, control is effortless. You might think you were being tolerant, patient, nice. But let's be honest. What you call patience is often just fear in a polite outfit. Think about it. When was the last time you said, "This doesn't work for me," without padding it with 10 justifications? When was the last time you walked away without guilt, without second-guessing, without replaying the conversation 100 times in your head? If you can't remember, that's exactly why manipulation has a seat at your table. Nietzsche once said, "He who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster. And if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you." Now apply that to your own life. You've been tolerating selfishness, disrespect, passive aggression, not because you admire peace, but because you fear confrontation. And over time, that fear doesn't just invite manipulation, it trains it. You become the safe space for people to offload their chaos, to test your limits, to twist your empathy into obligation, and once they realize you don't push back, they don't stop, they settle in. Here's the pattern. You're available. They notice. You're flexible. They test. You're silent. They escalate. Until one day, you're not a person to them anymore. You're a function, a yes machine, a peacekeeper. And the irony? The more you give, the less they value you. Not because you're not worthy, but because you taught them that your time, your energy, your presence require no cost. And people don't treasure what they didn't have to earn. So now you sit with the aftermath, confused, exhausted, resentful, but still explaining, still justifying, still trying to find a gentle way to draw a line that should have been there from the beginning. Because you're afraid. Afraid of the reaction. Afraid of being called difficult. Afraid of being left. But let me give you something raw. If your presence depends on your silence, you're already gone. Boundaries aren't cruelty. They're clarity. They tell the world, this is where I end. This is what I don't accept. This is what I protect. And manipulative people, they don't fear your anger. They fear your distance, your detachment, your refusal to play. Because manipulation isn't about power, it's about access. And the moment you become inaccessible, the game ends. You've been taught that kindness means being available, that love means being open, that decency means enduring. But those ideas are dangerous half-truths. Kindness without discernment becomes self-destruction. Openness without limits becomes exposure. Endurance without balance becomes self-abandonment. So ask yourself now, where have you become too easy to reach? And what would happen if, for once, you shut the door? The nice person lie, and the energy you're bleeding. You like being seen as the nice one, the reasonable one, the calm, grounded, always understanding one. But here's a truth no one wants to admit. Being nice is one of the easiest ways to lose yourself. Not because kindness is weakness, it isn't. But because what most people call being nice is really just self-erasure with good PR. You grew up being told that being liked is the same as being good. That to be loved, you had to please. That to belong, you had to bend. So now you over-explain. You soften your tone to avoid discomfort. You smile when you want to scream. You offer help when you're drowning. And here's the brutal irony. The more agreeable you are, the more invisible you become. People don't respect what always agrees. They use it. They rely on it. They expect it. But they don't admire it. Let's call this what it is. You've made being liked more important than being real. And manipulators can smell that from across the room. They know you'll avoid conflict. They know you'll backtrack if they push hard enough. They know you'll take the blame to keep the peace. Because to you, losing someone feels worse than losing yourself. And they exploit that. They don't even have to try hard. You do it for them. You don't get drained because you care too much. You get drained because you give to those who don't return anything. And the reason you don't stop? Because your identity is tied to being needed. And if you're not needed, who are you? That's the trap. Jung talked about the persona, the mask you wear to function in society. It's not evil, it's not fake. But it becomes dangerous when you confuse it with your real self. You say yes, because the good version of you says yes. You stay calm because the image you've built can't be messy. You forgive too fast because nice people don't hold grudges. And over time, the mask becomes the prison. And the nice one becomes the perfect prey. Because what's more convenient than someone who won't push back, who won't ask for anything, who just absorbs, accommodates, agrees? Let me ask you something painful. What are you pretending not to need? Respect? Recognition? Reciprocity? Do you convince yourself that love should be unconditional, so you never have to confront the fact that yours is always one-sided? Do you label your exhaustion as just being an empath, instead of facing the fact that you've become emotionally available to people who don't deserve access to you? You're bleeding energy. Not because life is hard, but because you're leaking through every hole you refuse to seal. Every "it's okay" when it wasn't. Every "don't worry about it" when it tore you apart. Every "sure, I can help" when you were already crumbling. These are not acts of love. They are acts of fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of abandonment. Fear of being misunderstood. But here's what no one tells you. You can survive being disliked. You will not die if someone calls you selfish. You will not collapse if someone says, "You've changed." And yes, the day you set a boundary, they will say you're cruel. But that's not because you are. It's because your usefulness has ended. You think you were nice. But niceness without self-respect is just bait. And the longer you wear that mask, the harder it will be to take it off, even when it's suffocating you. So here's your moment. Not to become hard or cruel or cold, but to become clear. To choose honesty over performance. Self-respect over validation. Truth over comfort. Because if you don't, someone else will keep deciding what your value is. The first no is a rebirth. There's a strange silence that follows the first time you say it. No. No explanation. No justification. No nervous smile to soften the blow. Just the word. Clean. Absolute. Sacred. At first it will feel like a betrayal, not of them, but of the role you've always played. The fixer. The forgiver. The giver. The one who never makes things difficult. And now here you are, difficult by choice, uncooperative, unavailable, free. Make no mistake, the first no is not small. It's a funeral, a quiet, necessary death. You're burying the version of yourself that made peace with being walked over. And of course it hurts. Not because you're wrong, but because you finally stopped being useful to people who never truly saw you. They'll say, "You've changed." They'll say, "You're being dramatic." They'll say, "What happened to you?" As if your silence now is an attack, as if your refusal is an insult. But the truth is brutal. They're not mourning you. They're mourning the control they lost. See, manipulators don't fear confrontation. They thrive on it. It gives them something to push against, a chance to pull you back in. But what they cannot stand, what breaks their rhythm, is your stillness, your withdrawal, your unapologetic refusal to participate. Because when you stop reacting, you stop being predictable. And when you stop being predictable, you stop being controllable. Let's reframe the word selfish for a moment. You've been called it, haven't you? For choosing space, for setting limits, for not giving more of yourself when it cost your peace. But maybe selfish is just what people call you when they can no longer use you on their terms. Maybe selfish is a compliment, a sign that you've remembered your own center. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Saying no isn't just a boundary, it's a declaration, a moment of radical consciousness. You're no longer performing, you're no longer seeking to be saved. You've stopped rehearsing for a role that was killing you quietly. You're not asking for permission, you're not offering disclaimers. You're standing, silent, still. And in that stillness, you are no longer bait. Let's be honest. They never loved the real you. They loved the function, the reaction, the yes, the fix, the version of you that made their life easier. And now that version is gone. Let them grieve. Let them call you cold. Let them label you anything they want. Because for the first time, you are no longer playing their part. You are becoming your own. You might feel guilty. That's normal. Years of programming don't dissolve in a single refusal, but sit with the discomfort. Let it ache. Because that ache isn't wrongness. It's detox. It's the residue of a life built on external validation finally being cleaned out by self-respect. And what comes after that? Silence, space, and something new. Power. You'll feel it the moment you say no and don't explain. You'll feel it when you watch someone try to provoke you and you don't bite. You'll feel it when someone with a habit of controlling you starts to look confused, unsure why their methods no longer work. That's your rebirth. Not loud, not dramatic, just you, no longer reacting. No is a wall, no is a mirror, no is a threshold. And once you cross it, you don't go back. The loneliness of the unmanipulated. There's a silence that comes after power, not the kind of silence filled with peace. Not at first, but the kind that echoes, the kind that reveals just how much noise you had been tolerating. This is what nobody tells you. When you finally become untouchable, you also become alone. Not because you pushed people away, but because once you stop being manipulated, you stop being convenient. And convenience is what most people loved about you. Let's be honest. When you were available, agreeable, forgiving, you were surrounded. Attention, messages, invitations, warm smiles. But deep down, you knew. You knew those connections were built on your compliance, not your essence. And now that you've changed the rules, the crowd thins. Not because you've become cruel, but because you've become clear. Power has a price, and that price is often solitude. People don't know what to do with someone who no longer needs to be understood, who doesn't flinch when ignored, who doesn't beg to be chosen, who doesn't return just because they asked. They call it distance, they call it arrogance, they call it cold. But what they're really seeing is self-respect without apology. Nietzsche once wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will be lonely often, and sometimes frightened. But no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself." That's what you're experiencing now. Not rejection, reintegration. You're coming back to yourself. And for a while, that looks like emptiness, feels like silence, echoes like loss. But that's not the end. That's the clearing. The space left behind when manipulation leaves, and your true self has room to speak. Yes, it's lonely. But this kind of loneliness is sacred, because it's the first time your presence isn't being purchased by your sacrifice. No more explaining, no more overextending, no more bending in half to be acceptable. Now you're here, whole, unfolded, untouchable. And if they can't meet you here, at your full height, they were never truly with you. There will be days you miss your old self, days where you feel the urge to apologize for your silence, to justify your limits, to go back to being useful. But that's just your nervous system remembering how comfort once looked like captivity. You're not broken. You're just detoxing from approval. Let it pass. Let the silence deepen. Let the room empty. Let your identity expand to fill the space. You don't need to be liked. You need to be aligned. And now we come full circle. You thought you were safe because you were surrounded, because you were loved, because you were needed. But now you know, being needed isn't the same as being respected. And being surrounded doesn't mean you were seen. So here you are, no longer explaining, no longer convincing, no longer asking permission to exist with boundaries. You are no longer useful. And that's exactly when you become powerful. But now, I'll leave you with a question. Are you ready to be hated by those who only loved your silence? Because that is the true threshold. And once you cross it, you're finally free.